Veritas. SCP Files. Episode 2. The Cleaners. Incident 98-3. Third incident involving SCP-98, colloquially known as surgeon crabs. First incident outside of planned testing. Object class, safe. Risk assessment level, low. Reported by D-760, also known as Thomas Arley. Report made November 7th, 2000. It's strange to think that this is the last thing I'll do before they wipe my memory. Don't get me wrong, I'm looking forward to being able to sleep without nightmares and limp through the halls without constantly checking behind me. But it's bittersweet, you know? Don't know where I'll end up next. For all I know, I'll be the next test subject on some new horror. Maybe I'll even die, and this'll all have been for naught. But at least I won't be seeing those damn crabs every time I close my eyes. So that's something. It's weird. All the horrors here, all the terrible experiments and the twisted creatures and the evil places, and the thing that actually got me in the end was simple complacency. I just got too comfortable with it all. Stupid, really. I bet it's weird to some people how comfortable I got with all the horror, but it actually wasn't all that difficult. You see the same messed up things enough and it all becomes normal. You have no idea how much blood I've mopped up cleaning here. How many body parts I've tossed in the bin for incineration. How many times I've thought, poor sod, before cleaning up a mess, only to go on my way and never really think about it again. Nobody ever thinks about the cleaners. We're pretty much invisible, ignored, the boring end to a terrible, gruesome tale. But somebody has to do it, right? The researchers just send the D classes in to test whatever half-baked theory they've got, and they really don't care what happens. The blood flies, and pieces scatter, and people puke, and they aren't the ones who have to care about it. I care, though. Not because it's gore or whatever, that's part of the job. It's more because of how damn difficult blood actually is to clean. It takes some really intense chemicals and some good hard scrubbing. Have you noticed that everything around here is white? White walls, white tiles, white uniforms for the researchers. You know, for a company that loves blood so much, they really could have chosen a color scheme that makes it a bit easier to clean up. But no, gotta have that professional white. Make the cleaners scrub everything for hours. You really do get used to it, though, so you get complacent. Take, 173, for example. Surely you know of it. Nobody shuts up about it, no matter what site you're stationed at. It's that statue that moves when nobody's looking at it, even if you're blinking, and it kills you by snapping your neck or by strangling you. I've been cleaning that thing's cell for a good long while. Every single day. For the first few times I was in there, I felt that visceral fear. You look at it, this ugly, disgusting statue, smeared in blood and feces, and you can just feel how badly it wants to cover the distance and kill you. Those first few times mopping those floors were awful. The drone of the guards in the back as they alerted each other when they were blinking, knowing that you were one mistimed blink away from death. That you wouldn't even know if this was your last moment. Just 1 second, and you're dead. God, that thing scared me. I remember mopping the floors so fast I couldn't have done a proper thorough job. But how long can you truly stay afraid for? Weeks? Months? I've been mopping the blood and poop off that cell daily for 7 years. I even mop the statue itself now. I've never seen it move, never seen it do anything but stand there coated in crap. It's just another thing to be cleaned. Big whoop. Of all the threatening things I've seen, 98 didn't even make the top 10. Maybe not even top 50. To me, they were always just crabs. Kind of boring compared to the murder statue. I go in once a week, clean out the dead crabs, change the water filter, remove the remaining pieces of 98's last meal, and clean any solid waste. It was pretty simple. Took maybe 30 minutes between the two of us. You probably don't even know what 98 is. That's how normal they seem. It's a type of crab that has these sharpened knife-like legs instead of those, pincer claw things. Sorry, there's probably some type of scientific term for them. I don't know. I never bothered to learn. Compared to everything else out there, they were always so tame. The way they fed was horrifying, sure, keeping their victims alive for as long as possible as they consumed them bite by bite, piece by piece, only stopping when their prey's breathing ended. But even so, they were just crabs. I used to clean their room with one other D-class, an older man named Mike. He was a rather short and squat man. What little was left of his hair was a light gray, and he was missing several of his teeth. Not a pleasant man to look at, but he was a pleasant one to talk to at least. Mike was one of those people who always had a tune in his heart and never stopped humming it for even a second. There was barely ever a moment with him around that wasn't filled with a soft melodic hum, sometimes cheerful and quick, sometimes a slow, somber march. He was pretty good at it too. Definitely had an ear for catchy tunes that get stuck in your head. But to be honest, it did get rather irritating. Sometimes you just want to zone out and get in the zen of cleaning, and it was always impossible with Mike around, always jarring you rudely out of your mind. Sorry. These are awful things to say about the dead. He was nice enough. Let's leave it at that. Mike and I obeyed every rule around 98 at the start. They're intelligent little critters, you see, and they can learn the pattern you take through the room. And if they do that, that's when their hunt begins. So you count them, you make sure they're all there on the monitors, and you know where they all are. It's irritating, to be honest, as they like to hide in the rocks scattered about their room. Once they're all accounted for, you pick a route through the room that's different from the ones you picked recently, and you go, being watchful and careful not to let them encircle you. But again, you do that every week for long enough without anything happening. We just got too complacent. You get to feel safe. You start to cut corners. You start weighing whether all of the protocols are really necessary. Like, who cares if you can't spot a few of them? With how well they blend into the rocks, sometimes we'd have to watch those cameras for 30, 40 minutes to find them all. And we had so many rooms to clean. It's not like the Foundation officers would let us rest. We had a list to get through, and only once we finished it would we be off for the day. So we just started going in, even though we couldn't find one or two, and it was fine. And then we started going in when we couldn't find 5 or 6, and that was fine too. Then we stopped changing our routes. And for a while, that was fine as well. You have to understand, it didn't seem to matter. We got lazy, and nothing changed, so it all seemed fine. I couldn't tell you why they attacked last month. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced there was nothing different about that day, We glanced at the monitors, found most of the crabs, and walked in as normal. Mike carrying the replacement filter, me carrying the buckets, cleaners, and the rags. We crossed the room with no issue and began our work. Mike was already humming an upbeat little jingle. It was no different, not even a little. The crabs had consumed several chickens that week, and their torn and ravaged bodies were bloated by the water, nearly unrecognizable with how much flesh had been torn off and consumed. I began grabbing their chunks and plunking them down into the bucket when I heard a second voice join in Mike's humming. I froze, my hand hovering over a chunk of flesh that might have once been a chicken's face, and I glanced over at Mike. He seemed just as fazed by the sudden harmonizing and was looking at me closely, assessing whether I had been the one who had joined him. As his own music died in his throat, we both turned to face the source of the hum coming from behind us. One of the crabs was standing there, waving its claws at us and making that strange upbeat hum that was ever so slightly off from Mike's original tune, ever so slightly wrong. The crab took a few steps backwards, rising up and out of the water onto a patch of dry sand. Like a sailor lost to a siren's call, Mike followed, sloshing his way through the small pool. I wanted to call out to him, remind him of all the protocols that suddenly seemed to matter so much, remind him of all that we had read about their hunting tactics. But I knew in that moment that drawing attention to myself would be a very, very bad idea. So I just watched. I watched as that sharp little thing lured him up onto the sand. Watched as the other crabs closed in around him, silently encircling him from just outside his vision. Watched as the first crab slowed and he approached it, bending down towards it as though it were a dog he wanted to pet. "Did you like my song?" Mike crooned to the crab. That's when they struck, two of them, lightning fast, digging their knives into his heel, severing his Achilles tendons in one quick, neat movement. Even as Mike collapsed in a scream of agony, they were already spitting a viscous yellow fluid into the wounds, instantly cauterizing and sealing them, preventing his precious lifeblood from spilling out and shortening his life and their opportunity to feed. Mike's scream lasted barely 3 seconds before another one lunged for his throat. It must have been a calculated hit to the larynx and the vocal cords, because Mike's scream became a strangled gurgle, and he made no further sounds, save a despairing whimper as the swarm descended. The wet sound of flesh tearing filled the room, accompanied by the clicking of the crabs as they scuttled over him. And all the while, they continued to hum that cheerful, jovial tune as they worked on it. There were spurts of blood with each bite that would spray across the sand, but only for a moment before the cuts were sealed. One of them pulled a long strip of glistening flesh from his face. Another began to flinch the skin from his fingers. It wasn't long before Mike couldn't even move, all of his major muscles shredded and tendons severed. All the movement that remained, aside from the many scuttling legs, was the rapid rise and fall of his chest as his panicked, agonized breathing continued, not even enough to shake a few crabs loose. I had stood there, glued to the spot with the horror of it all. But as the crabs entered their feeding rhythm, I once again became aware of how close I was to Mike's fate. The mound of feeding bodies lay between me and the exit. All I could think about was avoiding it for myself, about not being the next living meal for the crabs. I knew I had to be quiet, but I also knew I could not stay there. It was only a matter of time before I would be the next target. It was all I could do to remain still, fighting against the adrenaline that I could feel pumping through my veins. If I ran, if I splashed, they would hear. They would attack. I began to inch forwards, towards a gap between the wall and the feeding cluster. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and every shaking breath I took seemed so loud they almost drowned out the humming melody. I almost thought the icy, clutching fear would paralyze me, but somehow I managed to keep myself moving forward, my feet shuffling along the bottom of the pool. I have no idea how long it took me to get around the pile. Time seemed to be moving so slowly. There was nothing to tell me how long it had been. Somehow, I did make it. That awful hum drowned out everything else now as they mocked poor Mike, and I could almost taste my freedom as the door drew closer, inch by terrifying inch. But just as I reached the last patch of dry sand that covered the rest of the distance to the door, I felt the knife-like claw enter the back of my left leg. A white-hot pain lanced through my leg, tearing out a chunk of meat, and I screamed, stumbling forwards and collapsing onto the sand on my side. I felt the crab spit that awful yellow mucus into my cut, and my heart seized as I saw several of the surgeon crabs scuttling towards me. They must have heard the scrabble of wet sand as I frantically crawled myself away from them, for I swear they started to make a hissing sound to mock my attempts at escape. The crab that had injured me backed off, swinging widely around to the side, looking for my hand. Their twisted version of Mike's humming, coupled with the hissing parody of wet sand scraping, closed in around me. It seemed strange now, but at the time I was so mad at them for taunting me with his sounds still. I had just been screaming. Why didn't they latch on to that? I still don't know the answer, though I wonder how many weeks they'd listened to his humming and my silence. Maybe that's why they'd picked him and not me. Maybe that's what had saved me. Realizing this, I knew what I had to do. I let myself go limp, slumping back against the rough sand. I closed my eyes, held my breath, and, despite the pulsing pain in my leg, I willed my heartbeat to slow. I tried to feel the sand I was lying against, tried to convince myself that I was on the beach, just a nice vacation. The only crabs in sight, totally normal, and more scared of me than I was of them. The minutes seemed to stretch into eternity. I kept holding my breath, even as my lungs started to protest in that quiet, aching throb. The hissing and humming was everywhere, and I waited for the next bite, the next shot of pain. The tune rose and fell, and I held my breath. When at last my lungs could take no more, I risked opening my eyes. The crabs were retreating. They had lost interest. The tantalizing pull of distressed and helpless Mike, more irresistible than a possibly dead meal that had never even given them interesting sounds to use in their hunt. It took every ounce of willpower I could muster to not gasp for air. With the last of my strength, I pulled myself up to my good leg and hobbled to the exit. I did not look back as I left the room. I've been told Mike was still alive when they got to him. I've also been told that the damage was too extensive. They didn't even try to save him, putting him out of his misery then and there. They offered me photos. I did not look. I don't need any more nightmares. I still hear that humming sometimes, in the night, when all else is still and quiet. I still see the pulsing mound of Mike and the surgeon crabs every time I close my eyes. They told me I can no longer be a janitor, as 6 to 8 months recovery time is just too much to spare on a D-class. That's fine with me. I don't ever want that role again. I refuse to return to that quiet complacency. I have no idea where I'll be sent next after I take these amnestics. Maybe I didn't really save my life at all, and I'm just heading towards some new horror that I won't survive. But whatever it is, it's gotta be better than living with those memories. And at least I've been assured that there will be no crabs. Thomas Arley did not survive his next assignment. It says here that due to the nature of his injury from 098 and the lengthy recovery period it would require, he was assigned to the ATZAC protocol for SCP-3000. But when I try to find details of any kind about the protocol or SCP-3000, the information is redacted. Apparently, security clearance of level 5 is needed to see anything about this protocol, including what 3000 even is. I can only hope that it isn't some sort of crab. I find I cannot shake the worry that he was reassigned to his death. A possible 8 months is seen as unacceptable for a D-class personnel. So why would they reassign him to something so seemingly important unless it was as a literal sacrifice? I wonder what would happen if I asked the head of the ethics department here at Site 2024, Dr. Miranda Sterling. She does have an open-door policy. However, if information around 3000 is this tightly guarded, perhaps asking after it would put me on a watch list I'd rather not be on. SCP-98 has no incident reports recorded since this. However, it is possible that they're here somewhere in this pile of unsorted paperwork and have just not been reviewed, recorded, and filed. I'm unsure if 98's containment protocols were ever reviewed and updated to prevent this sort of incident from reoccurring. This was 24 years ago. God, I hope they were updated in that time, and we don't have more gruesome reports like this somewhere here. I really don't want to read anything more about the surgeon crabs. I know we have an ethical containment protocol coordinator on staff, who's responsible for aiding researchers in revising and enhancing containment protocols, following containment breaches, or when new information relevant to SCP containment arises. He's never actually been in the office while I've been here. Must be rather busy with that role, I suppose. I'll send him a message, see if he can stop by to answer a few questions. But for now, this is all the information I have on 098.
Vault Veritas, SCP Files, is a podcast inspired by the SCP Foundation. The Cleaners is based on SCP-098 by Dr. Everett Mann and SCP-173 by Moto42 from the SCP Wiki. They can be found at scpwiki.com/scp-098 and scpwiki.com/scp-173. It is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 3.0 unported license. This episode was performed by Justin Gellner, and it was written and edited by Leola Angel. We welcome comments. Please email us at vaultveritas@gmail.com. Join our Discord channel using the link in the episode description, or visit our Patreon listed as Vault Veritas SCP Files. Thanks for listening.